I used to believe that real love, the kind that lasts decades, the kind our parents spoke of with soft smiles, was rare but possible. And I thought I had found it in Margaret. I met Margaret at a local community fundraiser here in Lexington, Kentucky. She was standing by the raffle table, laughing with the volunteers over the absurdity of the prizes, a ceramic duck lamp, and a basket of pickles. She had this calming, confident presence, like someone who knew exactly who she was. She wasn't flashy. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just felt safe, familiar, like someone you could build a life with. At the time, I was 48. I'd been through the emotional acrobatics of love, before divorced once, dated a few women who didn't quite fit, but something about Margaret settled the noise in my head. She was a physical therapist, running a small clinic near the edge of town, and I worked in logistics at a regional warehouse. Our lives were modest but steady. We made sense together. Within the first year, we blended routines like clockwork. Saturday mornings were for walking our dogs through the park trails. Sunday nights, she cooked, and I cleaned. We didn't need adventure, we had rhythm. She'd leave me little notes in my lunchbox, some corny, some sweet. I built her a potting bench for her garden, and watched her coax life out of the soil like it was magic. Friends would say, "You two look like you've been married for decades." And maybe, in a way, we had hearts that already understood each other. When I proposed, it wasn't at some grand vacation or fancy restaurant. It was a quiet evening, on the back porch, with the sound of crickets and the smell of bourbon on the breeze. I had a simple gold band and a folding chair next to hers. "Let's finish the rest of life together," I said. Margaret smiled, teared up, and said yes, before I could even get on one knee. We held each other for a long time that night, and I remember thinking, this is what home feels like. We set the wedding for the following spring, something small, with just a few close friends and our families, at the old barn venue near Elkhorn Creek. She talked endlessly about the centerpieces she wanted, wildflowers, nothing to polish down. We even joked about doing away with the cake and just serving banana pudding. It was simple. It was us. But looking back, I can see how the shift began slow, almost imperceptible. The kind of change you miss when you're too comfortable, too trusting. At first, it was small things. She'd forget to return my calls during the day, saying the clinic was busier than ever. Then she'd cancel our usual grocery run to take care of some paperwork. Her texts became shorter. Conversations at dinner turned more practical than personal. I chalked it up to stress. Her clinic had been expanding, and she mentioned being short-staffed. But it was more than that. The warmth in her eyes began to dim. The little jokes faded. When I asked about wedding planning, things we used to enjoy, she seemed distracted. "We've got time," she'd say. "Let's not rush it." I wanted to believe her. At our age, we're not looking for fireworks. We're looking for steadiness, peace. And so I ignored the doubts, the little tugs in my gut telling me something wasn't right. Because that's what love does when you're older. You try harder. You give more grace. You believe the best in people, even when the truth is whispering through the cracks. And still, I couldn't have imagined just how far that crack would widen, or how completely the ground beneath me would give way. It all truly began to unravel one night when we were sitting with friends on Jim and Evelyn's screened-in porch, sipping iced tea, fireflies blinking in the dusk. Someone brought up one of those icebreaker questions. You know the type. If you could go back and relive one relationship, which would it be? I'll never forget how quickly Margaret answered. "James," she said, with a soft chuckle. James, her ex-husband, the man who, by her own account, broke her down over years of subtle emotional manipulation. The room went quiet. I froze, and that was the first time I realized, maybe I wasn't the love she was still holding on to. But that moment, that's a story in itself, and it would only be the beginning of something much deeper, much harder to swallow. Because what I thought was a quiet, grown-up love turned out to be something far more fragile than I ever expected. And what came next? Well, let's just say, it changed everything. It's strange how love fades not like a light switch, but more like the dimming of a lamp you didn't realize was on a timer. After Margaret and I got engaged, there was a stretch of time where everything felt golden. We were planning a quiet spring wedding at a countryside barn just outside Asheville. Nothing fancy, just vows under the oak trees, a bluegrass trio, and some peach cobbler for dessert. She used to get excited flipping through bridal magazines on the couch, asking me if I liked lace or linen tablecloths, or whether we should seat her Uncle Larry next to my sister Cheryl, even though they had political differences. Those conversations used to last hours. There was laughter, there was tenderness, but something shifted. Slowly, At first I thought it was just work stress. Margaret's clinic had taken on new patients from a nearby rehab center, and she was pulling longer hours. She'd come home late, exhausted, too tired to eat. I'd warm up her plate. She'd pick at it, while scrolling through her phone, and say something like, "We'll look at flowers this weekend, I promise." Except we never did. Weeks turned into months. Her excitement dulled. That bright curiosity she once had about building a life together just wasn't there anymore. She stopped sending me little texts during the day, the kind that used to make me smile when I was hauling freight or fixing a jammed loading dock printer. Her good mornings turned into one-word answers. Her good nights became silent, turns away in bed. I started noticing the gaps in our life. And when you're older, those gaps feel heavier. They're not just the absence of words there. Absences of presence, of intention. I remember one morning, I brought her coffee in bed, just like I always had. She barely looked up from her phone. "Thanks," she said flatly, as if I were just someone passing through. No smile, no warmth. I stood there longer than I should have, hoping she'd look up, hoping she'd remember me. I tried convincing myself it was a phase. After all, relationships aren't always sunshine and Sunday brunches. People get tired. Life gets hard. But there's a difference between comfort and distance. And Margaret had grown distant emotionally, spiritually, physically. Our conversations became logistical. "Did you pay the gas bill? Don't forget your appointment next week. I think we're out of milk." Not once did she ask how my day was, how I was sleeping, or if something was bothering me. And truth be told, I started holding back. I stopped telling her about the guys at work, or my worries about my brother's health, or the dreams I was having about buying that used RV and road tripping west. Why share when the person next to you is already halfway gone? There was a night we were watching an old movie, To Kill a Mockingbird, one she used to love. It came to the scene where Atticus walks out of the courtroom and the whole balcony rises in silence. I looked over to say something, only to find her asleep. Not peacefully asleep. Disconnected, arms crossed, face turned. Like she didn't want to be there at all. And yet, I kept brushing it off. Because when you're older, and you think you've finally found someone to grow old with, you don't walk away at the first sign of trouble. You patch the roof. You reinforce the foundation. You wait out the storm. I'd been through enough life to know love isn't a fairy tale, but I still believed in repair. But those subtle cracks kept widening. She canceled 2 different meetings with the wedding coordinator. Claimed she forgot. One afternoon, I walked past her computer and saw she had closed a tab quickly. Nothing obvious, just quick, uncomfortable. When I asked her later if everything was okay, she smiled weakly, patted my hand, and said, "Don't be so dramatic." I should have known then. That moment right there, that's when it really hit me. I wasn't imagining things. I was losing her. Not because of a fight, not because of betrayal, but because, somehow, without even realizing it, she had stopped choosing me. It's a hell of a thing to feel someone quietly unlatch their soul from yours, while still sharing a kitchen table. And still, I held on. Because what else was I supposed to do? I was a man in his 50s who had finally dared to believe in forever again. Who wants to admit they might have been wrong? But then came the moment I couldn't ignore, the moment that made the air in the room change. The night at Evelyn and Jim's porch, when someone asked that innocent question. If you could relive one relationship from your past, which would it be? Margaret didn't hesitate. And that was when the cracks finally gave way to a break. But I'll get to that in a moment, because what she said that night wasn't just careless, it was the first real truth she'd spoken in months. And it would end up shattering everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and the limits of forgiveness. It was one of those late summer evenings that makes you forget time, the kind where the breeze carries the smell of fresh-cut grass, and the fireflies start dancing before the first stars even appear. Jim and Evelyn had invited a few of us over for drinks and light music on their screened-in porch, just a casual gathering of old friends, swapping stories, laughing about the past, and pretending we weren't all starting to forget names here and there. There were 6 of us that night, me and Margaret, Jim and Evelyn, and another couple from the neighborhood, folks we'd known for years. Evelyn had this idea she'd picked up from her granddaughter, a game people were playing on that TikTok app. We all chuckled at the notion most of us barely knew how to open Facebook without asking someone's kid, but the idea was simple. A jar of random, personal questions you had to answer honestly, without flinching or judgment. No heavy rules, just fun. At first it was all harmless. What's your favorite meal from childhood? If you could move anywhere, Where would you go? The kind of things that lead to easy stories and warm chuckles. I remember Margaret leaning against me, sipping her iced tea, her laughter soft and familiar. It felt good. For a moment, I let myself believe maybe we'd turned a corner. Maybe the distance I'd been feeling was just a passing shadow. Then the next question came. If you could relive one relationship from your past, which would it be? That's the kind of question you expect people to joke their way out of maybe. Mention their high school sweetheart with a sheepish grin. Or say something like, "No way I'm going back there." But Margaret didn't hesitate, not even a beat. She smiled, almost wistfully, and said, "Oh, probably James." It was quiet. So quiet, I could hear the cicadas outside start up again. Everyone just froze. Even Evelyn, who was halfway through pouring herself a second glass of wine, stopped mid-poured. James, her ex-husband, the same James she had once described to me as controlling, manipulative, and emotionally distant. The man she claimed taught her what not to accept in a relationship. The one she said scarred her view of commitment for years. And now here she was, casually naming him as the one relationship she'd relive. She didn't look at me when she said it. That's what stung the most. She was looking past the porch railing, out toward the trees, as if she was somewhere else. Somewhere I didn't exist. I didn't say anything. Not right away. I remember, just sitting there, the condensation from my glass, wetting my palm, trying to smile like everyone else, while my chest burned. She must have realized how it sounded, because she gave a little awkward laugh, and quickly added, "I mean, not that I'd want to. It's just, he was a big part of my life. That's all." But it was too late. The damage had been done. Later that night, after we got home, I asked her gently, "Why James?" I tried not to sound angry. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I just wanted to understand. Wanted her to offer something, anything that would reassure me she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. She shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like it was no big deal. It was just a silly game. "Mike, you're reading too much into it." I remember her smirking a little, like I was being dramatic. But it didn't feel silly to me. It felt revealing. That moment pulled back a curtain I hadn't been ready to look behind. It explained the withdrawn glances, the distance in bed, the way her mind seemed elsewhere even when her body was right beside me. She had been thinking about him, whether for comparison or curiosity. I didn't know, but the fact that he still occupied any part of her heart, that chilled me. The rest of that week was like walking on eggshells. Margaret kept acting as if nothing had happened. She chatted about groceries, reminded me to pick up the dry cleaning, even talked about updating the welcome sign on our front porch. But I was different. Something had shifted inside me. I started seeing the past few months not as isolated stress or fatigue, but as signals, clues, pieces of a larger picture I had refused to assemble. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and found her still awake, scrolling on her phone in the living room. When I asked what she was doing, she looked startled, like a teenager caught sneaking out. "Just couldn't sleep," she said, locking the screen. But I saw the faint glow of a message still open, the name at the top. I couldn't quite catch it. I didn't press her, not then. But something inside me knew. That night on the porch, that offhand comment in a silly game had opened a door, and I had no idea yet what lay on the other side. But I could feel it, like standing at the edge of a storm before it breaks. What I didn't know was that the next storm wouldn't come with thunder or lightning. It would come with a sentence. One quiet evening, standing in our own kitchen, Margaret would look me in the eye and say 7 words I never imagined hearing from the woman I was about to marry. "I think I need a break from us." It was a Wednesday evening, the kind that used to feel comforting. The house smelled faintly of rosemary and lemon from the roast I'd made. I'd come home early from the warehouse, hoping Margaret and I could finally sit down, talk wedding details, maybe laugh the way we used to before the porch night. Everything started to unravel. When I walked in, I could feel it. Not the kind of tension that comes from a bad day at work or a headache, but the kind that wraps itself around your chest before anyone says a word. Margaret was sitting on the living room couch, her laptop in her lap, but the screen was dark. She wasn't typing, reading, working. She was just staring. "Hey," I said softly, setting down my keys. "I figured we could eat in tonight. Thought we might finally look at the music list for the wedding." She didn't look up. "You're early," she said, flat, almost like she was annoyed. I tried to laugh it off, but my gut told me this wasn't about the time. Something deeper was simmering just beneath her calm exterior. I started prepping plates in the kitchen, hoping the smell of warm food might bring her around. But she stayed silent, and that silence sat like a stone in the middle of the room. Finally, I walked back in and sat across from her. "What's going on, Margaret?" She looked at me, and for a moment, her eyes softened. But then something shifted. She closed the laptop, sat back, and took a deep breath like she was about to give a speech she'd rehearsed too many times in front of a mirror. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began. "About us. About everything." That's never a good opening line. I leaned in slightly, already bracing. "Okay." She looked down, twisting her ring absent-mindedly. "I think I need a break." I blinked. "A break? What does that even mean?" She hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. "I need some time to figure things out. I need space to think clearly." And her voice cracked just slightly. "I've also been in touch with James." James, there it was. The other shoe. The ex-husband. For a few seconds, I didn't speak. I don't even think I blinked. My mind didn't go blank, it went loud. 1,000 thoughts crashing in all at once. Was this a joke? Why now? After everything? And then how long has this been going on? "So you need a break. To see if there's still something there with James?" I asked, my voice lower than usual. The calm kind of quiet that comes right before the storm. She nodded, barely. I need to know if I'm making the right decision. "Before we get married." I stood up, not to intimidate. Just because I couldn't sit in that chair anymore. I paced slowly, gripping the back of the recliner like it might keep me grounded. "You're telling me," I said carefully, "that after all these months of planning, all the talks about forever, now you want to take a break to go test drive your ex?" "It's not like that," she shot back, suddenly defensive. "I'm not going to move in with him or anything. I just need clarity. I need to know for sure." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it hit so hard, it felt like my only option. "Clarity," I repeated. "You want to put me and our relationship on hold so you can explore a failed marriage. And then what if it doesn't work out? You come back and pick up where we left off." She winced. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is asking me to put my life on pause while you chase nostalgia with a man who once made you feel small." She bit her lip, and I saw the tremble start. But I was done absorbing this, as if it was reasonable, because it wasn't. This wasn't a confused young girl in her 20s, unsure of love. This was a grown woman who knew exactly what she was doing. And somewhere along the way, she decided that my love, my presence, my consistency, none of that outweighed the curiosity of what if. "I'm not asking for permission," she said, more sternly now. "This is something I need." That hit differently. It wasn't just disappointment, I felt it was clarity of my own. Because in that moment, I saw the truth. I was no longer her partner. I was a placeholder, a comfort zone, someone who made life easier while her heart wandered. I sat back down, slowly, took a long breath. "Well," I said, "if that's what you need, take your break." She looked startled, like she expected me to fight harder, maybe beg, maybe try to fix it. "I'll stay at my sister's for a while," she mumbled. "It's not forever." I nodded. "Okay." She looked at me again, searching for something: guilt, regret, emotion. But all I could offer was distance. She packed a small bag that night. Quietly, no tears, no dramatic goodbye. Just a few taps on the phone, some toiletries, and the sound of her footsteps fading down the hallway. The door closed, and I sat alone in a house that was no longer a home. But even then, I wasn't broken. Not really, because something inside me had already started to shift. I realized she wanted clarity. Well, so did I. And if she thought this break would put me on pause, she was about to learn that not every man waits in the wings hoping to be chosen. Sometimes, the break you asked for is the one you never come back from. And as I sat there, letting that truth settle in, like dust on an unused chair, a new thought emerged. What if this wasn't the end of something? What if this was the beginning of something far better? I'd build on my own, without needing someone else's permission. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in months, I knew it wouldn't involve waiting for Margaret to decide whether or not I was enough. The first night after Margaret left, the house didn't feel empty, it felt quiet. And not the peaceful kind of quiet, like after a long day on the porch with a good book. No, this was the sharp-edged kind. The kind where the fridge hum sounds louder, the hallway feels longer, and the silence presses in like it's asking you a question you don't want to answer. I sat in that silence with a glass of bourbon, and a single thought echoing in my head. Do I wait for a man my age, in his mid-50s, That's not just a romantic question. It's a question about dignity, about time, about how many more holidays you'll spend waiting for someone to come around, and how many more nights you'll let yourself be something temporary to someone who should have been permanent. I thought about all the years I'd spent alone after my divorce, rebuilding piece by piece my career, my friendships, my sense of self. Margaret had walked into that rebuilt life and, for a while, made it feel full, real. But now, she was asking me to step aside, to pause, while she explored her doubts. That's when I realized that wasn't mourning the loss of her. I was mourning the man I had almost let myself become again. Because here's the thing. When someone tells you they're unsure about you, they're already halfway out the door. And you have two choices. You can chase them down, try to convince them you're worth staying for, or you can reclaim your damn self. So the next morning, I didn't sit around and wait for a phone call. I made one. Noah was my best friend from college. He's the kind of guy who'll tell you the truth even if it hurts, and he showed up an hour later with donuts, strong coffee, and a "what the hell happened" look in his eyes. We sat on the porch, and I laid it all out. The TikTok game, the request for a break, the quiet way she packed her bag like she already knew she wasn't coming back. Noah listened, didn't interrupt once. And when I finished, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, "So, what's your move?" I stared out at the old oak in the yard, the one we'd planned to string lights on for the wedding, and I said the words that felt like unlocking a door in my own chest. "I'm not going to wait." That was the moment everything shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Because love, real love, doesn't leave you sitting on a shelf while it shops around for alternatives. Love doesn't say, "Let me go see if I miss you enough to come back." That's not love. That's a safety net. And I'd be damned if I spent another season of my life being someone's backup plan. I got to work. First thing Monday, I called the realtor. The house Margaret and I shared, it was under my name. I had paid the down payment, the taxes, the repairs. She helped decorate, sure picked the curtains and threw pillows, but the mortgage was mine. I decided it wasn't just her I needed to move on from. It was the place we had built under false promises. The realtor came by, did a walkthrough, and within a week, the listing was live. The market was good, and interest was already rolling in. Next, I went through the house, room by room. Her things were still there, shoes by the door, a few sweaters in the closet, her favorite tea tins in the cabinet. I didn't throw them out. I wasn't angry. I just didn't want them here anymore. I boxed everything up neatly, hired a small moving service, had it all delivered to her sister's place, with a short note: "Here's your stuff. Good luck with whatever you're looking for." That was it. No yelling, no bitter text threads. Just action. And the more I moved, the more myself I began to feel. Every box packed, every drawer cleared, felt like pulling weeds out of a garden I had stopped tending long ago. Then came the part I didn't expect. Peace. Real peace. There's a stillness that comes when you stop waiting for someone to value you the way you deserve. When you stop negotiating your worth. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's a quiet kind of strength. And it's the kind that lasts. Margaret sent a few messages over the next few days. Nothing dramatic. Just, "Hope you're doing okay." Then, "Want to talk soon?" And eventually, I think I may have made a mistake. But by then, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to be the man who waited by the phone, holding on to hope like a lottery ticket. I was going to be the man who walked forward, even if it meant walking alone for a while, because I'd rather build something new from scratch than live in a house full of ghosts. And what came next? Well, let's just say Margaret wasn't the only one capable of starting over. There's a certain power that comes from reclaiming space, not just physical space, but emotional, mental, even spiritual. After Margaret walked out and I made the choice not to wait, something inside me clicked. I stopped seeing myself as the man left behind. I started seeing myself as the man moving forward. The house was the first thing. It had once felt like a shared project, a symbol of a second chance at building a life with someone. But now, walking through those familiar hallways, I could see all the corners where I had compromised. The art in the hallway wasn't my taste. The throw pillows on the couch, the scented candles in the bathroom, her touch, not mine. At some point, I'd let her style, her rhythm, her way of living quietly, replace my own. It happens gradually. You think you're building something together, but if you're not careful, you wake up one day and realize you're just a guest in your own home. So I changed that. I started with the small stuff. The live, laugh, love signs came down. The artificial eucalyptus wreath she insisted on hanging, even though we had real plants. Gone. I repainted the bedroom. Not to erase her, but to reclaim myself. A deep, quiet blue. Calm, clean. Mine. And with every drawer I emptied, and every photo I wrapped up and boxed, I felt something lift. I called the moving service, and had all of Margaret's belongings sent to her sister's home. I didn't toss them. I didn't break anything. I just removed them from my world. Packaged them with care and finality. I even left a note, not bitter, not sarcastic, just clear, wishing you clarity. Here's your space. I'm taking back mine. That act, simple as it was, became a declaration. I wasn't going to be haunted in my own house. Next came the practical step: selling the place. The house was in my name, and I realized I didn't want to rattle around inside its empty shell, reliving memories that no longer held meaning. I called a realtor, explained the situation honestly, and within 2 weeks, we had showings booked. Turns out, healing and real estate go hand in hand. I took down the wedding vision board we'd taped inside the pantry. It had swatches of linen, magazine clippings of floral arrangements, even the seating chart we had started to sketch out. I stared at it for a long while before folding it carefully and placing it in a storage box, not because I wanted to keep it, but because I needed to honor that version of me, the one who believed. Not everything we lose is a tragedy. Sometimes, it's a turning point. And this wasn't just about reclaiming physical space. It was about dignity, identity, about realizing how much of myself I'd quietly handed over for the sake of harmony. I started cooking meals I liked, hearty, messy ones she used to roll her eyes at. Played the music I hadn't heard in years, classic rock, with a bit of twang, the kind she always said gave her a headache. I pulled my old guitar out of the closet, dusted it off, and played until my fingers remembered what my heart had forgotten. Was me again. Not Margaret's fiancé, not the man waiting. Just Mike. And I didn't just stop there. One night, I sat out on the porch, thinking about the job posting I had seen months ago, opening at the company's Western Division, in Colorado. I hadn't applied back then because Margaret didn't want to leave Kentucky. But now, there was no reason not to. I pulled up the application, filled it out, hit submit, not because I needed to run, but because it was finally time to move. What Margaret never understood is that asking for space doesn't mean you get to control the pace. She stepped out for clarity. I found mine in motion, and with every box packed, every wall repainted, every email sent, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just recovery. It was reinvention. But the real test would come not in how I moved on, but in how she responded when she realized I wasn't where she left me. Because soon, the phone would ring. And this time, I wouldn't be the man she remembered. I'd be someone far stronger than she expected. When word started getting around that Margaret and I had taken a break, the responses came fast and came in waves. At first, it was just the curious texts. From neighbors, co-workers, the folks at church. Simple things like, "Hey Mike, everything all right?" Or "Heard some talk, just checking in." You could feel the careful tiptoeing behind their words. Like they weren't sure how much they were allowed to ask. I didn't blast my side of the story. I didn't run around setting the record straight, or trying to rally sympathy. I simply told the truth when people asked. She needed time to revisit an old relationship, I'd say. I decided not to wait around and see how it turned out. That was it. No drama, no raised voice, no cheap shots. And let me tell you, there's a kind of quiet strength in sticking to the truth. You don't need theatrics when the facts are clear. And with that approach, something unexpected happened. The silence started working in my favor. People began forming their own opinions, and most of them didn't require much context to figure out who had walked away from what our mutual friends folks. We used to have over 4 Sunday barbecue. Couples we'd vacationed with, many of them reached out, not just to express concern, but to quietly say, "Good on you, Mike." They didn't say it outright, but I could hear the subtext in their tone. "She messed up, and you're handling it better than most would." Even folks I wasn't particularly close to started reacting. One of the ladies from our old neighborhood, book club Linda, a sharp-witted widow who never minced words, left a message on my machine. "She must be out of her mind. Call if you want banana bread and common sense." That one made me laugh out loud. What I realized was this: people, pay attention to how you carry yourself when things fall apart. Not just what you say, but what you don't say. I didn't speak poorly of Margaret. I didn't post vague, angry quotes online. I didn't play victim. I just lived my life, honestly. Kept showing up to work, went to Sunday service. Helped My neighbor, fix his shed. That quiet consistency. It speaks louder than any accusation. And while I was focused on clearing out the house, filling job applications, and finally dusting off the old dreams I'd set aside, Margaret was apparently trying to control the narrative on her end. She'd been telling people it was just a temporary pause. Something we were doing to reconnect with ourselves individually. I heard that secondhand from Evelyn, who caught her saying it at the farmer's market one morning. Evelyn raised an eyebrow and told her flatly, "Well, Mike sure seems to be moving forward just fine. That's the thing about the truth, it's not always fast, but it's steady, and eventually, it finds its way into every room." Margaret might have hoped people would see me as cold, reactive, or quick to quit. But all they saw was a man who didn't beg, didn't break, and didn't wait. They saw a man who responded to being put on hold by hanging up with dignity. And that changed everything. Because the next call I got wasn't from a friend, it was from Margaret. And this time, she wasn't reaching out from a place of confidence. She was reaching out from a place of fear. But by then, it was already too late. The man she left behind wasn't waiting by the phone. He'd already left the station. It didn't take long before the weight of Margaret's decision started catching up with her. From the outside, she was still trying to maintain control, posting smiling selfies, sharing vague quotes about growth and listening to your heart. But there was something hollow in it all. A little too polished, too performative, like she was putting on a show for a crowd that had already gone home. Through mutual friends, word trickled back. James, the man she'd left me hanging for, wasn't exactly the second chance at love she had hoped for. Turns out, the same habits that wrecked their marriage the first time never left him. The flirtation, the emotional distance, the wandering eyes. Some folks even said he showed up to a neighborhood wine tasting with a different woman on his arm 2 weeks after. Margaret had reconnected with him. And while she was busy chasing ghosts, my life was quietly rising. The house sold. Not only that, it sold above asking price. I signed the closing papers with a cup of black coffee in one hand and a strange, settled feeling in my chest. Not regret, not sadness, just completion. Like closing the cover on a book I had once loved but that no longer held my story. Around the same time, I got the call from Colorado. I'd been offered the job. It wasn't just a step up professionally, it was a clean slate. A full relocation package, flexible work hours, and a team that genuinely respected experience over flash. They said, "We don't care about how many hashtags you know. We care if you can lead." And I could. I packed what I needed. Let go of what I didn't. A few sentimental things came with me: my father's old pocketknife, a photo of me and my brother fishing on Lake Norris, a worn flannel Margaret never liked but I always loved. The rest, I left behind. No need to bring the ghosts with me. Meanwhile, Margaret's picture began to crack. Clients began backing away from her design business. It was subtle at first, one postponed contract, one delayed project, but it built. Word got around. Some of it from people who had quietly heard the real reason we broke up. Others from watching her try to spin the story too many different ways. Turns out, when you say we're just taking space to grow individually, but your ex-fiancé is clearly thriving and moving cross-country, without a backward glance, people start to connect the dots. Her sister, who always had more sense than sentiment, reached out one day. "She really thought you'd wait, Mike," she said. "I don't think it ever occurred to her that you might just leave." Margaret began texting more. At first, it was polite, then nostalgic, then desperate. "Can we talk? I miss what we had." James isn't who I remembered. But by then, I wasn't living in that version of the story anymore. I was renting a small but beautiful apartment overlooking the foothills outside Denver. I had joined a local hiking group. I adopted a senior rescue dog named Max, half who knows what, with a graying muzzle and the most loyal eyes I'd ever seen. My evenings were peaceful, my mornings productive. I slept better, ate better, laughed more. Not because I was proving anything to her, but because I had finally returned to myself. There's this myth that after heartbreak, you have to rebuild something bigger to show what you lost. But the truth is, you don't have to build bigger. You just have to build true, real, solid. And for the first time in years, everything in my life felt like it belonged to me. Margaret once told me that love was about choosing each other every day. But what she forgot is that when you stop choosing someone even for a little while, sometimes that door doesn't stay open. Sometimes the person on the other side learns how to walk forward, and they don't look back. She showed up unannounced. It was a Wednesday afternoon, in early fall crisp air. golden leaves just starting to blanket the sidewalk outside my new office in Boulder. I had just finished a meeting and was walking back from the break room with a coffee in hand when I saw her standing by the reception desk. Margaret. She looked smaller somehow, not physically but in presence. The woman who once walked into rooms like she belonged there, now stood like she wasn't sure if she was allowed. Our eyes met. I nodded politely and gestured toward the side lounge, a quiet corner with 2 chairs and a small table between them. She followed me there without a word. We sat down, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she said it. I made a mistake. I didn't answer right away. I just let her words hang in the air, giving them the weight they deserved. She continued, her voice quieter now, more fragile than I'd ever heard it. I thought I needed to know if there was something still there with James. But he hasn't changed. And I don't know what I was thinking, walking away from what we had. From you. She was crying now, softly, wiping her face with the sleeve of a sweater I didn't recognize. I was scared, she whispered, scared of choosing wrong. But I see now I already had what I was looking for. I looked at her, really looked, and I didn't see the woman I used to want back. I saw someone who had gambled with love not out of cruelty, but out of fear. And fear is a terrible foundation for anything lasting. You didn't just walk away, Margaret, I said calmly. You left knowing there was someone waiting on the other side. And you asked me to pause my life, while you figured out if I was still enough. Her eyes welled again. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand gently. This isn't anger, I told her. It's clarity. You made your choice. I made mine. And I think I know they were the right ones. She nodded, but it wasn't agreement. It was acceptance. A slow realization that the door she once assumed would always be open had quietly closed behind her. We sat there a moment longer. No dramatic outburst. No grand goodbye. Just a long, final silence between 2 people who once believed they'd grow old together, and now knew better. She stood. I stood. And with a soft "take care, Mike," she walked out the same way she had months before. Only this time, I didn't feel hollow. I felt whole. Looking back now, I don't see that break as a betrayal anymore. I see it as the moment I finally woke up. When Margaret first said she needed space, I thought my world was falling apart. I had visions of empty chairs at our wedding, boxes packed with regret, long nights wondering what I did wrong. But what I've learned since then is something far more powerful. Sometimes, what feels like heartbreak is actually your life putting itself back in alignment. Sometimes, what feels like rejection is really a redirection. I learned that love isn't about holding on at all costs. It's not about waiting patiently while someone decides if you're worthy of staying. It's about 2 people choosing each other every day freely, without doubt. And the moment that choice becomes conditional, uncertain, or convenient, it's not love anymore. It's comfort. It's familiarity. It's fear masquerading as something deeper. Margaret taught me that, not through her words, but through her actions. And in return, I learned to listen not to promises, but to patterns. To watch how someone shows up when things get hard, when their past comes knocking, when the road isn't perfectly paved, because that's when their truth comes out. I also learned that healing doesn't require bitterness, that you don't have to hate the person who hurt you to move on from them. You just have to love yourself enough to let go. I didn't slam the door on Margaret's way out. I didn't torture memory or rewrite the story to make myself the hero. I simply chose not to stay in a story where I was no longer being written into the next chapter. That takes strength. But more than that, takes clarity. There were nights early on when I'd lie awake, not sad, but confused, wondering how someone could walk away so calmly from something so carefully built. And then one morning, I stopped asking that question, because the answer didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was what I did next. And what I did was reclaim my peace. I moved to a place that felt like possibility. I filled my days with new challenges, new connections, even new routines. I hiked. I cooked. I joined a local book groups. Margaret always laughed at me for wanting to do. I adopted Max, that scruffy mutt with the slow walk and big heart. And in all these simple things, I found pieces of myself I hadn't even realized I'd lost. I didn't just survive what happened. I transformed because of it. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. Not every closed door is a loss. Some doors close to keep you from walking into the wrong room. Some endings aren't punishments, they're invitations. Invitations to choose better, to choose yourself, to trust that the life you imagined with someone else isn't the only version of happiness that exists. And today, I'm grateful. Grateful for the break that broke me free. Grateful that I saw her true self before we ever said our vows. Grateful that life gave me a second chance this time, with no strings and no waiting. So, if you're in that place sitting, in the quiet, wondering why someone you love doesn't choose you, let me tell you something. I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who made you an option. You don't need to pause your life, hoping someone circles back. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is walking away from the people who can't see you clearly and walking straight toward the life that can.